the family dinner where my mother-in-law delivered her latest ultimatum, she smiled over her wine glass and said, "Well, if you're going to take that attitude about the holidays, then maybe the children just won't be spending time with their grandparents this month. It would be such a shame for them to lose that, but that's your choice, isn't it, dear? You're the one making it hard." My husband stared at his plate, and I set down a folder and said, "I've written them all down. Every single time you threatened to take my children away to make me do what you want. 3 years of it. And I think it's time we talked about it in front of everyone because it stops today." Let me back up. Because to understand why I spent 3 years being controlled through my own children, you have to understand how my in-laws discovered the one lever that would always move me, and how they pulled it, and what it took to finally cut the cord they'd wrapped around my kids. My name is Corinne Baptiste. I'm 36 years old, and for 3 years my in-laws used access to my children, my own children, as a weapon to control and punish me, dangling the grandkids' relationship with them as a prize I had to earn through obedience. This is the story of how they did it, why it worked for so long, and the day I finally took my children back. Let me tell you about my in-laws, the Wins. The Wins were a controlling family, and my mother-in-law, Patricia, was its engine. A woman for whom love and control were the same thing, who expressed care through dominance, who needed to be the axis around which her son's life turned. From the moment I married David, Patricia treated me as an obstacle to her authority over him, a rival for control of his life and choices. For the early years before children, this expressed itself in the ordinary ways: the criticism, the boundary pushing, the competition for David's loyalty. I managed it, kept my distance, protected my marriage from her reach as best I could. And then we had children, and Patricia found the perfect weapon. Because here is what changed when my kids were born. I now had something I loved more than my own comfort, more than my own peace, more than anything, my children. And I wanted my children to have grandparents. I believed, the way most parents do, that a relationship with extended family was good for them, that grandparents were a gift, that it would be wrong to deprive my kids of the Wins. That belief, that good, normal, loving belief, was the exact vulnerability Patricia needed. Because the moment my children's relationship with their grandparents became something I valued, it became something Patricia could threaten to take away. Let me describe how the control actually worked, because the mechanics are the whole horror. Patricia and my father-in-law made themselves central to my children's lives, devoted grandparents, frequent visits. The kids adored them, all of which was lovely and also, I'd come to understand, strategic. Because once the grandparent relationship was established and the children loved it, Patricia began to attach conditions to it. Not overtly, at first, but the message became clear. Access to the grandchildren was contingent on my compliance. If I displeased Patricia, pushed back on her interference, set a boundary, made a parenting decision she disagreed with, failed to defer, she would threaten, subtly or openly, the grandchildren's access. "Well, if that's how you feel, maybe we just won't see the children this week." It would be a shame for the kids to miss their time with grandma, but if you're going to be difficult. The children so love coming here. I'd hate for that to change because their mother couldn't be reasonable. Every disagreement, every boundary, every assertion of my own authority as a parent was met with the same lever. Comply, or the children lose their grandparents, and it'll be your fault. And it worked. God help me, it worked for 3 years. Because I would do almost anything to avoid hurting my children, and Patricia knew it, and she used my love for my kids as the rope to bind me. I bit my tongue. I deferred. I let her interfere, let her override my parenting, let her disrespect me in my own home, because the alternative she constantly threatened, was my children losing grandparents they loved, and me being the one who took that away. I was controlled not through my own fear, but through my love for my kids, which is a far stronger and far crueler leash. Let me tell you what this did to me, because it's a specific kind of torment. I was being held hostage by my own love. Every threat to the grandchildren's access landed on the exact place I was most vulnerable, my desire to protect my children from loss, from pain, from being deprived. Patricia had found the one thing I couldn't bear, and she pulled it whenever she needed me to fall in line. And the insidious part was that it made me complicit in my own control. I told myself I was tolerating Patricia's abuse, for the kids, when in fact I was teaching my children that their mother could be controlled, that grandma's love came with conditions. That compliance was how you kept the people you loved. I was being poisoned, and my kids were watching me drink it. And David, I have to talk about David because his role is the second wound. My husband saw what his mother was doing, and for 3 years he let it happen. Not because he agreed with it, but because he was Patricia's son, raised inside her control, conditioned to keep the peace with her at any cost, including the cost of his own wife. When I come to him, upset, after another of Patricia's ultimatums, David would minimize, deflect, ask me to just keep the peace, to not make waves, to give in for the sake of the kids, unknowingly echoing his mother's exact leverage. David wasn't the villain. But his passivity made him Patricia's instrument, and for 3 years I fought his mother essentially alone, with my own husband quietly urging me to surrender. Let me tell you about the subplot that changed things. My sister-in-law, David's sister, Renee, who'd escaped. Renee was David's older sister, and she'd gone through her own version of this years earlier. She had kids too, and Patricia had tried the same playbook on her, the same weaponizing of grandchild access. But Renee had gone out from under it, had established firm boundaries with Patricia years ago, at the cost of a period of estrangement, and had come out the other side with her autonomy intact. And Renee watched Patricia doing to me exactly what she'd done to her, and one day she took me aside. "She's using your kids to control you," Renee said. "I know, because she did it to me. The threats about the grandchildren, maybe we won't see them this week, making you feel like any boundary you set means the kids lose their grandparents. It's the whole game, Corinne." And here's what I learned. The threat only has power because you believe she'll follow through, and because you believe you'd be the one hurting the kids. But you wouldn't be. She would. She's the one choosing to withhold the grandchildren to punish you. That's on her, not you. The day I stopped accepting that her withholding was my fault, the whole thing fell apart. Renee's words were a crack of light. Because I'd been carrying the guilt, believing that if I stood up to Patricia and she cut off grandchild access, I would be the one depriving my kids. Renee reframed it. Patricia's withholding was Patricia's choice, Patricia's cruelty, Patricia's fault. If a grandmother would sever her relationship with her grandchildren to punish their mother for setting a boundary, that grandmother was revealing exactly how conditional and unhealthy her love was. And protecting my kids from that lesson was more important than preserving access to it. But understanding it wasn't the same as being free of it. And here's the midpoint, the time I complied and learned the truth about where compliance leads. About 2 years in, there was a major conflict. Patricia had done something egregious, overstepped badly with my kids, and I'd finally pushed back hard. Let me tell you what she did, because it's the thing that should have ended it 2 years earlier than it did. My younger child had a medical situation, nothing dire, but a doctor's instruction about diet that mattered, that I'd been clear with everyone about. And Patricia, during a visit, decided she knew better, overrode my explicit medical instruction, gave my child the thing the doctor had said not to. And when I found out and objected, she laughed it off. Told me I was being an overprotective, hysterical mother, that she'd raised children before I was born, that I should be grateful for her help, instead of criticizing it. She'd overridden a medical instruction about my own child, and then mocked me for caring. So I pushed back, hard, for the first time. I told her that she did not override my parenting decisions, that when I gave a medical instruction it was not a suggestion, and that if she couldn't respect that, she couldn't have unsupervised time with my kids. And Patricia deployed the full weapon. She cut off grandchild access entirely, refused to see the children at all, and told the family it was because I was a controlling, spiteful daughter-in-law keeping the grandchildren from their heartbroken grandparents over nothing. And my children, who loved their grandmother, were genuinely sad and confused. My daughter asked me, with her small, worried face, "Mommy, why doesn't Grandma want to see us anymore? Did we do something?" And that question, my child blaming herself for Patricia's punishment of me, broke me completely, so I caved. Couldn't bear my kids' confusion, couldn't bear my daughter thinking she'd done something wrong, couldn't bear being blamed. I went to Patricia and I apologized for a boundary I'd had every right to set. Apologized for objecting to her overriding my child's medical care. And I submitted and access was restored, and my daughter was happy again, and Patricia had learned definitively that the weapon worked absolutely. She could override my parenting, mock me, endanger my child's care, and if I objected, she'd simply withhold the grandchildren until I apologized for objecting. She'd found a way to make me apologize to her for her own misconduct, using my children's confusion as the pressure. It was, I see now, a perfect and total control. And here is what compliance taught me the hard way. It didn't buy peace, it bought escalation. Because once Patricia knew I would fold to protect the grandchild relationship, the demands only grew. The conditions got steeper. Interference got bolder. My compliance didn't satisfy the control, it fed it. Every time I gave in to protect my kids' access, I handed Patricia more power, and she used it to demand more, and the leash got shorter. I finally understood that there was no amount of compliance that would ever be enough, that the weapon would be pulled again and again as long as it worked, and that, keeping the peace for the kids, was actually teaching my kids to accept a lifetime of conditional, controlling love. Giving in wasn't protecting them, it was training them, and worse, I was modeling it. My daughter had watched her mother apologize to the grandmother who'd done something wrong in order to keep the peace. What was she learning? That when someone you love mistreats you and then punishes you for objecting, the answer is to apologize to them. I was raising a daughter to be the next Corrine, and a son to think this was how families worked. That realization was the one that finally moved me, more than my own suffering. I was not just being controlled. I was teaching my children to be controllable. That's when I decided to end it. And I decided to do it the way that actually works. Not with an outburst, not with a single confrontation Patricia could reframe, but with documentation, with a witness, with a plan, and with a line I would not cross no matter what she threatened. Here is what I did. First, I started writing it down. Every threat, every ultimatum, every time Patricia used grandchild access as leverage, the dates, the words, the context, the specific demand attached. Because I realized that the control worked partly through deniability. Each individual threat could be waved away as a misunderstanding, an overreaction, me being dramatic. But written down, dated, assembled, 3 years of threats became an undeniable pattern of coercion. Kept a record, and where threats came by text or message, I saved them. The pattern documented was damning. A grandmother systematically conditioning access to grandchildren on their mother's obedience. Second, I got clear on the law and my rights because I needed to know where I actually stood. And what I learned was empowering. I was the parent. My husband and I had full authority over our children. Grandparents have very limited rights to access grandchildren over a fit parent's objection. The law heavily favors parental authority. Trisha's entire power was an illusion built on my belief that I owed her access. In reality, I controlled my children's relationships, and Patricia's access existed entirely at my discretion. The weapon she'd held over me for 3 years was one I had been handing her, and could simply stop handing her, and there was very little she could legally do about it. Understanding that flipped the entire power dynamic in my mind. Third, I dealt with David, because I could not do this while my husband was quietly on his mother's side. I sat David down, and I showed him the documentation 3 years of his mother's coercion in writing. And I said the thing I should have said years earlier. Your mother has been using our children to control me for 3 years, and you've been asking me to let her, calling it keeping the peace. I'm done. I'm going to put a stop to it. And I need to know, right now, whether you're going to stand with your wife and children, or whether you're going to keep protecting your mother's right to hold our kids hostage. Because I'll do this with you or without you, but I need to know which marriage I'm in. And David, faced with the documentation, faced with the choice stated plainly, faced with losing me, finally woke up. Reading 3 years of his mother's coercion laid out in dates and quotes did what my years of complaints hadn't. It made the pattern undeniable to him. He chose us. Not perfectly, not without difficulty, but he chose us. And that changed everything, because Patricia's power had partly depended on David's compliance too. Fourth, I found my ally and my witness in Renee, who was ready to stand up and confirm the pattern, having lived it herself. And with Renee's corroboration, David's alignment, and 3 years of documentation, I was ready. Now let me tell you about the dinner. A family gathering, and Patricia, sensing my growing resistance, decided to reassert control with a fresh ultimatum. Over her wine glass, she delivered it. If I was going to take that attitude about the holidays, then maybe the children just wouldn't be spending time with their grandparents this month. Such a shame for them, but my choice, wasn't it? I was the one making it hard. The weapon pulled again in front of everyone, and I set down my folder. I've written them all down, I said. Every single time you've threatened to take my children away to make me do what you want. 3 years of it. And I think it's time we talked about it in front of everyone because it stops today. The table went quiet. For 3 years, I said, Patricia has controlled me by threatening my children's access to their grandparents. Every time I set a boundary, every time I made a parenting decision she disagreed with, every time I failed to obey, she threatened to withhold the grandchildren, to cut off their relationship with her and blame me for it. I have it all documented. Here. I laid out the record, the dates, the exact words, the demand attached to each threat. Maybe we won't see the children this week. It would be a shame for them to lose their grandmother, but that's your choice. 3 years of using my own kids as bargaining chips to force my compliance. Patricia started to protest, but I kept going. And it worked for a long time, because I love my children and I couldn't bear the thought of them losing their grandparents, and I couldn't bear being blamed for it. Patricia found the one thing I'd do anything to protect, and she used it as a leash. But I finally understood something. Every time Patricia threatens to withhold the grandchildren, she's the one choosing to hurt them to punish me. Not me, her. A grandmother who would sever her relationship with her grandchildren to control their mother is showing exactly what her love is worth. And I'm not going to keep teaching my children that love comes with conditions and threats by letting their grandmother hold them hostage over me. I looked at Patricia directly. So here's what changed today. I'm the parent. My children's relationships are my decision, not yours, and the law agrees with me. Your access to my kids was never your right, it was my gift, and I gave it freely because I wanted them to have grandparents. But a gift that you turned into a weapon is a gift I can stop giving. From now on, you see my children on my terms, with respect, and the first time you ever again threaten their access to control me, you will not see them at all, and that will be your choice, not mine. The weapon doesn't work anymore because I've stopped agreeing to be afraid of it. And then Renee spoke. She did the same thing to me, Mom, Renee said quietly to the whole table. Years ago. Used my kids as leverage, exactly like this, until I put a stop to it. I stayed quiet while she did it to Corrine because I didn't want to reopen old wounds, and I'm ashamed of that. But it's a pattern, everyone. It's what she does. And it's time it stopped. And David, my husband, finally awake, put his hand on mine and said, Corrine's right. Mom, you've been using our kids to control my wife, and I let it happen for too long, and I'm done letting it happen. We're a united front now. You're welcome in our children's lives on respectful terms. You are not welcome to use them as a weapon ever again. Here is how it ended. A weapon broke, because a weapon only works as long as the target is afraid of it, and I had stopped being afraid. Trisha, exposed in front of the whole family, with her pattern documented and named, with her daughter confirming she'd done it before, with her son finally aligned against her, had nothing left. Her power had always been an illusion, sustained by my compliance and David's passivity, and the moment both of those ended, so did her control. She raged, at first, tried to cast herself as the wronged grandmother being cut off from her beloved grandchildren by a cruel daughter-in-law, tried to rally the family to that story. But the documentation undercut it, and Renee's corroboration undercut it, and the family, seeing 3 years of coercion laid out plainly, mostly understood what had really been happening. The narrative that I was keeping the kids from a loving grandmother collapsed against the reality that the grandmother had been using the kids as a bludgeon. Patricia had a choice to make, and it was clarifying to watch her make it. She could accept access to her grandchildren on respectful, unconditional terms, real grandparenthood, no leverage, or she could refuse those terms and lose access, and reveal that her love for the grandchildren had always been secondary to her need for control. And Patricia, to no one's surprise, chose control. She refused to accept that she couldn't use the kids as leverage, escalated, tried to punish us by withdrawing, and in doing so, proved my entire point. She'd rather not see her grandchildren at all than see them without power over me. That was the truth about her love, revealed at last, and my children were better off knowing it, or rather better off protected from it. He established firm boundaries, and Patricia's access became limited and conditional, on her behavior now, not mine. Over time, faced with actually losing the grandchildren she'd used as chips, she moderated somewhat, because it turned out she did want to see them, just less than she wanted to control me. The relationship exists now in a smaller, safer, boundaried form, and my children are protected from being used as weapons, and that's the win, not a warm reconciliation, but safety. David and I came out stronger, which I didn't expect. His awakening, finally choosing his wife and children over his mother's control, healed something that had been quietly broken in our marriage for years. He did real work to understand how his passivity had made him complicit, and he became, at last, the partner I needed, standing between his mother and our family instead of asking me to absorb her. That was worth more than the victory over Patricia. Renee is the ally I'm grateful for, the sister-in-law who'd survived the same weapon and finally broke her silence to help me survive it too. She carried guilt for staying quiet while Patricia turned the playbook on me, and her standing up at that table, admitting the pattern, was what made it undeniable. We're close now, the two women who refused, eventually, to let Patricia use their children as currency. For 3 years, my in-laws used my own children as bargaining chips to control me, dangling my kids' relationship with their grandparents as a prize I had to earn through obedience, threatening to take it away every time I dared to set a boundary or be my own parent. It worked because they found the one thing I'd do anything to protect. They weaponized my love for my children, which is the cruelest leash there is, because it doesn't feel like fear, it feels like being a good mother. I told myself I was tolerating their control, for the kids, when really I was teaching my kids that love is conditional and people you love can hold you hostage. The day everything changed was the day I wrote it all down, because a pattern of coercion that's too slippery to fight when it's spoken becomes undeniable when it's documented, dated, and laid on the table in front of everyone. And the day I understood the deeper truth, that every time Patricia threatened to withhold my children, she was the one choosing to hurt them, not me. The guilt she'd load onto me was always hers to carry. I stopped agreeing to be afraid of the weapon. And a weapon no one fears is just an empty threat. They thought my love for my children made me controllable forever. They never understood that the same love, once I stopped letting it be used against me, would make me unstoppable. Because a mother who will do anything to protect her children will, in the end, protect them even from the grandparents who tried to use them as chips. I took my children back, not from grandparents who loved them, from grandparents who loved controlling their mother more. And the difference between those two things is the whole reason I'll never hand them the leash again.